So it was a candy bar like your comfort food.
Yeah, I mean, chocolate has always been my comfort food, right? And that's not something I could get out in the village. So,
Right.
and even the chocolate there was not good. It like came from the United Arab Emirates. We're not talking like it wasn't, American chocolate or even
Or Swiss chocolate.
or Swiss chocolate or chocolate from the UK. You can
Yeah.
get Cadbury or anything like that.
Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I chat about stories and creativity in all different styles and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and my goal is to promote what Dale Carnegie stated in his famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He said, instead of condemning people, let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out why they do what they do. That's a lot more profitable and intriguing than criticism, and it breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. To know all is to forgive all. It's my firm belief that the goal of most creative people is to try to understand themselves and others. That's what makes artwork of all kinds so compelling. But more than that, the personal stories of my guests promote understanding as well. Roger C. Schenck, a cognitive scientist, said, human beings are not ideally set up to understand logic. They are ideally set up to understand stories. It's my hope that Story Power will help us understand each other better by sharing the stories of my guests. Today, I'm talking to Christine Herbert, and this is episode 81. And Christine has written this fabulous book. I'm only on chapter 3, but I'm already hooked. And so I wanted to talk to her. Also, Christine, I noticed that you live in the Pacific Northwest.
I do.
So I used to live there. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Lucinda.
So I am so interested in your whole story. That's why I can't wait. I don't usually read memoirs, but I was already hooked when you got there and you were making all these faux pas, and I thought, oh yeah, I'd be doing that too.
Yeah. And I think that's a very relatable kind of human thing, but definitely a Peace Corps thing. It's definitely a fish out of water story. And I think anyone who's tried to serve in the Peace Corps has felt that way.
Oh, really? Well, especially in a place as completely different than the United States as Zambia. I mean, I don't even know anything about their culture at all. So when you were in the Peace Corps, do they give you an indication of where you're going? Do they do any train you a little bit about the culture? And
so they do a little bit. So when you get your assignment, let me back up. Okay. When you apply for an assignment, you can have a preference. You can state a preference of what area of the world you'd like to serve in. You may or may not get your preferred area, but they do try to match you with that. And I had always wanted to go to Africa. So I had been given an assignment in Zambia. And yes. I thought, I know nothing about Zambia. And in fact, I wasn't even quite sure where it was, had to get out a map and take a look and figure out where it was. Right. But yeah, once you get matched with your assignment, you can decide if you're going to accept it or you'd like to wait for a different assignment, which you may or may not get. So it's kind of like, a take it or leave it situation, but it is volunteer. So you have to accept it. And then once you accept it, they do try to prepare you a little bit. They might give you, a reading list of things that might help you to understand the culture and people a little bit better before you get there. But most of your job training and really learning about what it's like to live in that culture is done once you get to the country.
It's one of those, I love those kind of stories, actually. Maybe that's why I was hooked. Oh, and I want to say the name of your book is The Color of the Elephant. And I love elephants. So it was like, oh, wow. And the colors on the cover. Oh my goodness. So, but I love that kind of story where people are just plopped down and they have to navigate the new situation. And probably it has to do with we moved a lot. That happened to me a lot. but
Yeah.
not as different as, the United States to Zambia. So now you just published this, right?
Yes. It just released in January this year.
Oh, January 2022. I'm going to say January 2022 because this episode's not even airing until August of 2023.
Super. And it'll still be on sale in 2023. So
that's right. That's right.
Happy to have people hear this conversation a year from now. That's fine.
And isn't that wonderful that once you publish something, it's just out in the world? Like I have been keeping a blog since 2013 and people can go back and read those. They're not very well written, but
but it's kind of special, right? To know that, you've had these experiences or thoughts or feelings and you've shared them with the world and they're there, they're just out there now and people can always go back and look at those and it may have meaning for them that you didn't even intend or realize. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So you got back quite a while ago from this. What prompted you to write your memoir now?
So the memoir took a long time to write. I write in my spare time. It's been sort of a hobby for me. Mm-hmm. I would say it's like the hobby that's like my torture hobby, like because writing is difficult for me and it takes me a long time to complete a project. But it won't let me go once I've had the idea to start a project, and I will complete it, even though it takes me a long time. And in this case, years. In this case, many years. It took me about 5 years to write it. And then it took me 10 years of pitching it to agencies and publishers and at writing conferences and just trying to get it off the ground and actually get it published. So it really did take a long time.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your introduction, I could relate to some things in your introduction. First off, I loved that the way you stated this, because I've had this experience in different ways. You said, I'm going to paraphrase you. You can correct me. But you were stating that it's so difficult to tell people all the changes that took place for you while you were doing this Peace Corps assignment and how you had a different perspective, and it articulating that so somebody else can understand that was difficult. And I could really understand that on a couple of different levels. One is I've had several different spiritual experiences in my life, and trying to explain that to someone, they don't get it. And my husband and I took a trip circumnavigating the globe in 1996. And it was that same kind of thing. You get back, you're so excited. You want to tell about your trip and people are bored. They don't, because they didn't experience what you did. They don't really want to hear it.
Or they can't hear it. They can't hear it. There's so much sometimes that happens and you can't possibly relay everything that happens and how that changed you or, what that meant to you. So I always have just this one line when people say, oh, you were in the Peace Corps. How was that? I just say they were the hardest and best years of my life. Full stop, because that's about all you can hear as a listener. If I really start talking to you about what I did and all the work that I did and all the failures and the successes, people's eyes glaze over and they're just ready to talk about something else. So
exactly.
Because they can't understand and they can't relate a lot of the time.
Well, and sometimes they don't. This is what I discovered. Some people, they can't even imagine doing something like that. And so they don't really want to hear it because they don't want a different experience, or not that different of an experience.
Or they want to enjoy it from the comfort of their armchair, which is what this book is about. Really, it's a way for me to share my experiences in a way that I think is entertaining and that people can take at their own pace.
Yes.
And that they can spend time with the things they want to spend time with and really think about those things more and, engage themselves on a deeper level about what is the meaning of this. Or they can breeze on to the next thing, they can take it at their own pace and get what they want to get out of it.
Yeah, that's true. I like that. So that's a really great reason to write a book.
Absolutely. And it helps me as a writer to write about these experiences that have had a deep effect on me.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that way, in writing about them, I can start learning more about
Mm-hmm.
what was it that happened?
Mm-hmm.
How did I feel about it? How did it change me?
Mm-hmm.
Or what questions have these experiences left in my mind still?
Mm-hmm.
Things that I'm still wrestling with,
Mm-hmm.
So it has helped me to kind of unpack my experience as well, writing about it.
Yes. Oh, I relate to that too. Yes, because this is one I still struggle with. But when we went into Notre Dame, the choir was playing, I'm singing, the choir was singing. All these tourists were there. They were quiet because the choir was singing. But we got our brochure. We started on the path because they have this, tourist path. And the very first thing I saw was this life-size sculpture of Joan of Arc, and I just started bawling. And I have no idea why. And my husband was like, okay, there's a little prayer place over here. You want to sit down? And we sat there for I don't know how long while and I could not tell you why that happened. Still, I mean, the only thing I can think of is there must be some connection between me and Joan of Arc. I don't know what it is, but yes. So I understand that as you're writing it, you're getting more clear on how you feel and what you learned. But do you think it's a lifetime experience of still learning things you'll just still always be learning things from that experience?
I think so. Especially when you have an experience like Peace Corps that lasts years, the term of service is 27 months. So that's 2 years, 3 months of your life. That's a long time. And that's a lot of experiences that you're going to carry with you throughout your life. So I think it is something that it's not just a one and done. I did it. I learned this. I've moved on. You're going to be thinking about these experiences for the rest of your life. And it may come up, at different times for you in unexpected ways.
Yes. In a way, I mean, it's not PTSD, but in a way, smells or sounds or something will bring a memory back to you. Is that what you're thinking?
Absolutely. There's things that happen all the time that bring me back to that time in my life, can evoke, certain feelings and memories and emotions. And I never quite know what it's going to be. Yeah. But it's certainly a part of my life that I've never been able to forget or let go. And I don't want to.
Right. I wouldn't want to either.
Yeah. And like I said, they were the hardest but best years of my life. Yes. So it's okay for me to go back to those times, and think about these really challenging moments or moments that were really full of grief. And that's, part of the human experience. And it's important to bring yourself back to those moments, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you keep in touch with any of the people that you met there or any of the team members that you worked with?
Absolutely. And I have to thank Facebook for that, really, because it's been, a way to connect with people throughout your life, really. It's amazing how many people are on there. And you're able to just kind of reconnect and get a little bit of each other's lives and reach out through chats if you need to. And that's helped me stay connected with volunteers, with people that I knew there, like missionaries, and also some people from my village they're on Facebook now and have found me and have reached out and which is great because letters after a number of years just kind of stopped flowing.
Yes.
And I was never quite sure if those people were still alive or if they, just stopped writing or what have you. So it's nice to have people reach out to me in a cyber way now and reconnect.
Well, it's neat that they have internet.
Yes, which really wasn't a thing when I was there. The internet was kind of still in its baby phases then. It was, full on here, but in Zambia, not so much. It was still this very slow dial-up connection. And it was almost impossible to communicate with my family and friends through the internet. It would take an hour. So you would pay for an hour of time. You'd go to an internet cafe You'd pay for an hour of time. And during that time, you could usually get into your email and read one and maybe reply to one. It took that long for everything to load. You'd just be watching a spinning wheel for, half an hour for something to happen. So needless to say, I didn't do that often, and it was frustrating when I would do it. But yes, things have changed a bit.
Yes. Now, the village that you lived in, how far was it from a larger city? And how did you get to the larger city? Did you have to walk, or did you?
So I would normally take like these mini buses if I could get them, or sometimes I would have to walk long distances, or I would pay somebody to get on their ox cart, or I've even paid somebody to take me on their bicycle. Like I would sit on the back of their bicycle. If I had package and I didn't want to carry it for 2 miles, I'm like, I will pay you to take me on the back of your bicycle. So you have to get creative sometimes. And a lot of the roads that I would be on until I got to more of the city were just dirt roads. So a lot of times they weren't passable depending on the time of year. If it was a rainy time of year, they weren't passable by vehicles. So you did have to get creative. It took me, I'd say 2 to 3 hours to get to the nearest town. I wouldn't even call it a city. It was a town. And that's where the post office was, where I could get my mail and so forth. And the nearest grocery store, where I could get, the nearest candy bar. So that was important to me. But that was hours away. And I'd often spend the night and then make the trek back the next day, because you didn't know how long it would really take you to get from point A to point B. And if you're going to be able to hitch a ride with someone. But the nearest city, I'll say maybe the capital city, that would probably by vehicle be 5-6 hours away. So not close. Yeah.
You didn't go there very often.
No, maybe a couple times a year, for official reasons. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. For meetings. Yeah. So it was a candy bar your comfort food?
Yeah. I mean, chocolate has always been my comfort food, right? And that's not something I could get out in the village. So, and even the chocolate there was not good. It came from the United Arab Emirates. We're not talking it wasn't, American chocolate or
Swiss chocolate
or chocolate from the UK, you can get Cadbury or anything like that. So this was just it was the closest approximation of a chocolate bar that you could get that is sort of familiar to you. And it would cost a week's wages, and you wouldn't even care. You'd be like, shut up and take my money. I just need, I need this chocolate bar so bad.
Yes, that's right. Oh my gosh. And then you just eat a little bit at a time.
I would try to nurse it. Yeah, I would make it last as long as I could. Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. So it said in the introduction that you're a body worker. And I was wondering, what was your job in the village?
Yeah. So I was a health educator. So I would form and train these little neighborhood health committees. And we would be addressing things like malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, AIDS, water and sanitation, maternal health, child health and nutrition. There were a number of health areas that we were focused on. So sometimes I'd be working in a clinic. Sometimes I'd be out in the field. I'd be helping to build wells or better latrines at schools with our water and sanitation group. So I had a number of things that I could do and did do. But yeah, so my degree's in biology, became a massage therapist. I did that for a long time. And then I did other things, did some nonprofit work. And now I'm actually back to doing that. I love doing body work. And so I've now come back to doing that. So I've been doing that off and on for 25 years now.
Wow. Yeah.
I think the bottom line is I just like to help people. And I think that has manifested in different ways throughout my life and throughout my career.
So are you working on another book?
Yes. So I've been working on a novel for quite a number of years because this book was completed a while back. But the novel that I've been working on still takes place in sub-Saharan Africa, where I used to live. It's just a fascinating area to me. And it's, I think, been a way for me to keep Africa alive for me, even though I'm not living there anymore. Just having that be alive in my imagination and putting myself back there in my mind has helped keep that connection to Africa, which has apparently been very important for me.
Yes, I love it. And so then I imagine anytime there's any story on the news about any of the countries in Africa, your ears perk up.
They certainly do. I do try to follow what's going on, and on the other hand, sometimes it feels like too much, and sometimes I try not, I'll read headlines, but I don't want to dive in because it can be very upsetting. But just like anything that's happening around the world that is newsworthy, sometimes it really is painful to hear about. A lot of what makes the news is shock, shock and awe, like listen to these, horrible things that are happening. And so sometimes you really do need to distance yourself. It's always like that fine balance that you want to hit, right? You want to be informed, but you don't want to be overwhelmed.
Right. Emotionally. Right. So what kind of government did they have and do they have now in Zambia?
So they have a president, and I'm trying to describe it. I'm not really a political science type person, so it's not really like for me to really talk about it so much. It has a complicated history there. It was a British colony for a long time. When I went, they had been independent from England for about 40 years, I think, before I arrived. So it had been, a good generation of remove from that, of being an independent country. However, there were people, the elders that I would meet and talk to, they did live through colonial rule. And so they did kind of, their English was fantastic, which was good for me. But, they had a real different experience, I think. And part of that, again, painful, being considered not even a second-class citizen in your own country, but a third-class citizen. I talk about it in my book where Luancha, which was the nearest town, aka the nearest candy bar, when I would go there, the town was in 3 sections. There was the first class, which used to be the white section. There was second class, which was the Indian section. And then there was the third class, which were the black Zambian section. It was the native Zambian section. So it was like you were third class in your own country.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so those designations still hold today because they just never changed, what things were called, and so that legacy is still there. So, yeah.
Oh yes. I gave my husband, he listens to, Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast, Star Talk. And he had Neil had a woman on there who had written a book called Caste. And it's about that very kind of thing all over the world, it's not just in the United States, although I think she is a United States citizen. So yeah, we have not gotten away from that. Even in this country, we still have that.
And that reminds me, so later when I came back to America, it was very hard for me to adjust to my life back here, especially being, a massage therapist at a nice wine country spa in California. And I thought, I just can't do this. I ended up going to Nepal and living in Nepal for a while. And the caste system was still very much in effect there. They were trying to kind of buck the system. And part of what I was there to do, I worked for an organization called Himalayan Healers. And we were teaching mostly untouchable caste members, which are the lowest caste members, to become massage therapists and work at these nice spas for the Europeans that would come there for trekking. And so they could have a really nice job and a really nice lifestyle. So it was very much a ironic job, the most ironic job I ever had, where I was teaching untouchables how to touch people for a living. It was great. It was like a social justice movement of its own kind. Yeah.
Yes, that was we went to India, and we were supposed to be there for 3 weeks. And after the first day, it was like, oh, we can't deal with this. So, but we did take a trip from Delhi to Agra to see the Taj Mahal. And when we got back, it was the middle of the night, because Agra's pretty far away from Delhi. And it was a government tour. And, there are all these people sleeping on the sidewalks.
Yeah.
And when we went to exchange some money, Bank of America, and underneath it are all these cardboard houses, underneath the beautiful Bank of America building. It was like, I just had a like disconnect in my head for a while about that.
Yeah. Just that juxtaposition of the haves and the have-nots, just right there. So present, so obvious.
Right.
Yeah.
And also we were advised, if, somebody touches you on the arm, don't pay attention to them, because if you give money to the beggars, you could get mobbed. Yeah. So that did happen to me. This little tiny child is touching my arm, and I just wanted so badly to turn around and look that child in the eye. But, they said, don't do that. You can't do that. And I was like, I wept about that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so heartbreaking. And it brings up these questions. What can be done? What can I do?
Right.
And sometimes, the answer is like, I don't think I can do anything. What can I do?
Right.
And then you're realizing it's more of a system problem.
Yeah. And how do you change the system?
Yeah. How do you address that? How do you change that? Yeah. And I think that's a question for society at large, not just, for us and what we consider our Western society, but for the world.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's so sad to me that human civilization started on the continent of Africa, and we treat them so badly. We wouldn't even be here if it weren't for Africa.
It's so interesting. This has been making me think about why I feel like this is a good segue here about why President Kennedy began the Peace Corps. And it took me a while. I really had to unpack what he said. The kernel of the idea of starting the Peace Corps came when he was on the trail trying to become president. He's on the campaign trail. And he stops at the University of Michigan for a night, just to spend the night there. He's not even prepared to give a talk. He's not going to do any of that. He shows up there. It's about 2 a.m. There are approximately 10,000 students waiting on the lawn to greet him. They all stayed up. The press has gone home. They don't think anything's happening. He gives an impromptu speech in the middle. It's incredibly eloquent. I can hardly put 2 sentences together, especially at 2 a.m. And he talks to them about the coming generation. At the time, it's 1960. It's October 1960. And he challenges them. He says, how many of you who are going to be doctors are willing to spend your days in Ghana? Technicians or engineers, how many of you are willing to work in the foreign service and spend your lives traveling around the world? On your willingness to do that, not merely to serve 1 or 2 years in the service, but on your willingness to contribute part of your life to this country, I think will depend the answer on whether a free society can compete. I think it can. And I think Americans are willing to contribute, but the effort must be far greater than we have ever made in the past. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And I thought also, what is a free society? What does he mean by like, I think I know what that means, but I've never taken economics. And so I looked it up and I said, what is a free society? What does he mean? And apparently a free society is where individuals act entirely of their own free will. The definition of this is sort of a spontaneous society. It builds up from the actions of individuals following the rules that promote peaceful cooperation. It's not imposed from above. Everyone's making their own decisions on how to cooperate with one another, how to help one another. And this in turn creates peaceful relations. And this is the kernel of his idea of
love that.
Becoming the Peace Corps. And this is how the Peace Corps was invented, really.
Yeah.
It was one of the first things he did when he became president. It was about March of 1961. So we'd only been president for a few months there. And he created the Peace Corps, sent the first group of people out there.
Yes. And
to Africa.
And it's still going, right?
Absolutely. Yes. It took a bit of a hiatus for COVID. Everyone got sent home in 2020. Yeah. But just this year, just a couple months ago, I believe, groups have started going back into their countries. And Zambia was one of those countries where people went back. Some of these people were serving in 2020, had been pulled from their site and have been itching to go back. And they've now been able to go back to their communities and complete their service.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah.
Yeah. I was really glad to hear that news. Yeah.
Yes. Now, this is not the same thing, but the church that I don't belong to it anymore, but the church I grew up in instituted something very similar to the Peace Corps. And so when I graduated from high school, I signed up for that. And I had a year-long assignment in Portland, Oregon, which actually I had lived there when I was a child, still had family there, at Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School, which was 90-something% Black. And I was just a teacher's aide. Well, of course, I did a bunch of church things too, but that was just a really great experience doing that. And I gained so much confidence, but I also learned, and our trip around the world was confirmation of this, that pretty much people want the same things. They may not live the same way that I do. Their customs might not be the same. Their religion might not be the same, but pretty much we all want to be loved and acknowledged and valued. And that was the really great thing about doing that for a year. That was such a great experience. Now, it's not going to Zambia. I'm not sure I'd be able to do that, actually. I admire people who could really just do that, I think.
I think we're not even aware of what we're capable of doing until we try or until we're faced with that situation.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't think I could hack it. There were certainly moments where I thought I couldn't hack it, especially when it came to like learning a new language. I'd never been good with language. Never. And it turned out, even though I was never the best language speaker there, I could do it. And it turned out I just wasn't a classroom learner. I needed that full immersion experience.
Yeah,
I really did.
Yeah. I mean, I live a mile from the Mexican border and I have taken a little bit of Spanish, but I think that's me too. I probably should just go watch those telenovelas or go to Mexico and just live for a while and listen. And then maybe I could learn to speak it. But yeah.
I feel like the most I got out of my language learning as far as Spanish is I spent a month in Ecuador when I was in college. And I learned more. And part of that stayed with the family. I was doing a homestay. I learned more just as sitting around, the kitchen table and talking than I had, in all my years of taking it in high school and in college. I took Spanish for years and I was dreadful at it. But just those, 4 or 5 weeks, I think I spent there. It just was such a learning experience. And I still remember some of those phrases and things that I learned by listening and I say, oh, that's how you say that, and like those things stuck with me. And I think that's how I'm hardwired. And I think that's how most people are wired as far as language learning.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and part of it is that for me anyway, is if I'm watching the facial expressions and the body language, it's so much easier to kind of interpret what they're saying. And then that connects with the words eventually. That connects with the words they're saying. Yeah, because, I I taught at a border town school, Douglas, Arizona, and most of the students were English was their second language, most of them. Mm-hmm. And so they would be talking to each other, and I would pick up things just by watching their body language as they're talking to each other. I didn't speak Spanish at all when I started. Of course, in Arizona, you have to teach in English unless it's a Spanish class or a French class or something.
Right.
And by the time I quit teaching high school, the law was even if a student came in and started going to school in the United States in Arizona, their senior year of high school, they had to have 4 years of English before they graduated. It was like, whoa, how do you fit 4 years of English into one, year? But they had strategies that I learned that I used in other ways of teaching to help them learn the language.
And it is kind of interesting how you can communicate with somebody even when there is a language barrier, right? Mm-hmm. You find ways of doing it, whether it's just kind of, pantomiming or whatever, it is kind of amazing how you can have communication there, even when it seems like communication is going to be a barrier. Mm-hmm. Some of my best friends in the village, one of them, she just didn't speak English really at all. She knew a handful of words, but she would come and spend time with me all the time. And, we'd, have an hour hanging out and talking or whatever, trying to talk about it. And people would be like, how are you friends with her? Like, she doesn't speak any English. What do you talk about? Why is she always there? I'm like, I don't know. We communicate somehow, we're able to connect, even though we're not really speaking each other's language. We're teaching each other a little bit here and there, but yeah, it was one of my most, precious friendships that I had. And it had nothing to do about, how much we could really say to one another. Oh, right. We could still connect.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that there are people that I connect with that, we didn't really speak, that I connected with while we were on our trip, that we didn't speak the same language, but it was wonderful to connect with them, or even to connect with people who don't think the same way you do, or, don't have the same religion or political views or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's because connection, I think, is so important. Doesn't matter how you connect.
Absolutely. I feel like some of my best conversations that have happened without speaking have happened on the dance floor. Just dancing with other people can be such a wonderful expression of, I don't know, just, having communion with somebody else and saying something without actually speaking. And that I just have some wonderful memories throughout my life of just dancing with people. Yeah.
Oh, I love that analogy. That's true. Yeah. I was never very good at that. I'm not good at that. I mean, I was in musicals and things because my background is in theater. I have education in theater, but I wasn't very good at it. I have dreams of dancing, sometimes at night, but I must have been a dancer in another life. But in this lifetime, I'm not very good at it.
Since I know you're a big reader and you talk about books a lot, do you have any, say, recommendations of books or anything that's coming to you about like cultural differences, maybe? I don't know. I'm always curious and asking people about their book recommendations.
Yes, there's one that I recommend a lot, and it's fairly old because it takes place in Afghanistan. It's called let's see if I can remember the name of it. The Dressmaker of Karakana or something like that. It takes place in Kabul. She lives in a suburb of Kabul, the young woman who it's about. And it's nonfiction, but it's like story. What did they call that? Narrative nonfiction. That's what they call it.
Narrative nonfiction. Yeah.
Yes. And the woman who wrote it is like a journalist or something. And so she met this woman through women's groups or somehow. It starts off the first time that the Taliban came through Afghanistan. And the woman that it's about is one of like 5 sisters or something like that. And then she has 2 brothers. And her father was in the military. He was like a high in the military, maybe a general in the military that was trying to fight against the Taliban. So as soon as they knew that they were coming, the mother and the father and the oldest brother had to leave. And they went up into the mountains someplace to get away from the Taliban and left the girls. Now, the oldest, the woman that this is about was the second sister. Her oldest sister was married and had children. And if I recall, it doesn't say what happened to her husband. He may have had to leave too. So all the sisters and the youngest brother, who was like 12 or 13, something like that, all lived in the house. And they were all going to school. In fact, the oldest sister and the second sister were teachers, I think, or maybe the second sister was in university to become a teacher, but they had to stop because Taliban, girls couldn't go to school.
Yeah.
So, and they had to have a way to support themselves. So the second sister came up with the idea. They were all pretty good at sewing. And so they went and bought fabric. And of course, they had to take their brother with them.
Right.
They had to take, and the brother had
an
to
escort, a male escort.
Right. And the brother had to negotiate with the man who sold the fabric and the thread and the needles and, all of that. He had to do the negotiations. She'd tell him what to say and he would go negotiate. And then, but they started, not only did they make clothing for people, but they taught a lot of the women in their neighborhood how to make clothes so that they could make money for their families too.
Right.
And so eventually she got involved in this women's movement. And there were some scary times because she was going to a conference with some of the women that she knew in her village, her suburb of Kabul. And they were going to another location on the bus. And the Taliban stopped the bus and why are you here? And, it was really scary because I don't think they had a man with them. Maybe they did. Or maybe one of the men on the bus stood up for them and said, "Oh, they're with me." I can't remember, but it was really like, what's going to happen? Yes, that's one that I would recommend. It's such a great book.
I think that feels very timely right now. Just kind of a look at, what happens when women are starting to not have their rights anymore.
I know.
And they have to, rely on men to give them a voice, and they have to be subversive in order to find ways to simply survive and to support their families.
Yes. And just getting the women in their neighborhood, just getting the women from their house to the central location where they're learning how to sew. That was even scary,
Yeah.
Because, they weren't supposed to be out on the street by themselves.
Right.
And then the second book that I would recommend is one that just came out. And Terry M. Brown was my guest not too long ago. I'm not even sure if her episode has aired yet, but she wrote a book about 3 generations of Ukrainian women. And it starts in 1973 and ends in 2016, which is the first Russian invasion of Ukraine. And it just happened to come out right before the current war in Ukraine. So of course,
really timely. Yeah.
Yes, it's going great guns. And it's called Sunflowers Beneath the Snow. And it is so fabulous because Terry lives in North Carolina or someplace like that. She's never been to Ukraine, but she met this woman, this young woman who she kind of bases her main character on. And the young woman told her about this incident where she came to the United States she came to the United States to be a camp counselor for summer camp. And then she was supposed to go home at the end. Well, the war broke out right before she was supposed to go home. And the State Department was going to send her to Poland to be into a refugee camp. And well, she didn't want to do that. So she had a lawyer working on extending her visa, but nothing was happening. And it was getting close to the time when they were going to send her to Poland. So she escaped to New York, to this Ukrainian neighborhood in New York City. Wow. And eventually it all got worked out so that her visa was extended and she still lives in the United States.
Oh, wow.
But when Terry heard that story, it was like, boom. The
inspiration. The muse showed up.
Right. And so it's sort of like J.K. Rowling having this vision of this boy walking down the train. Anyway, so she did a lot of research, and probably the young woman helped her too, but I felt like I was in Ukraine. And of course, it's the Soviet Union is still in power in Ukraine when the book starts. And the very first thing that happens is this man a gun is put to his head and he has to make a decision. Are you going to die today, or are you going to, because he's been a librarian and I think he's been passing information to some organization that's been trying to, fight against the Soviet Union. Or are you going to leave your family? So the wife and the daughter are left and they have no idea. Well, they think he's died. They think that he was having an affair with someone and there was a house fire and the woman and the man died and the husband died. That's not what happened. I won't say anymore. I won't give any more
spoilers.
But yeah, so the struggle when the teachers discovered how smart the daughter was, they put her name in for special education. So the Soviet Union moved the family to this other village maybe it was a city. And they gave the mother a job in the fish factory, cleaning fish, so that she would have money. And the daughter went to school and became like a medical researcher. So then, of course, the daughter gets married, has a daughter. So it's all these 3 generations of this one family. And what happens when the Soviet Union falls apart, and how, we would all think, oh, wow, they're free now. Yay. Everything's good. No, it's not like that. Corruption starts right off the bat. So it's just this immersive story about how these people survive. And it's a great book. Great book.
Sounds fascinating. I've written it down.
I mean, I've read just recently, I've read all these really great books by my guests, and I'm just getting ready the July 20th because I'll be on vacation. So I'm getting it scheduled before I go. I was talking to a doctor who's a researcher in Florida, and she's semi-retired now, but she has a medical thriller. And I went, oh my gosh, I totally forgot to read that book. So I have all these great books that I am reading by my guests like you.
Yeah, I think that's a really fun way to get introduced to books is, meet the people, have them tell you their story, what inspired them to write this. And then you might pick up things that you wouldn't have thought to get,
Right.
wouldn't have thought to pick up and read. I think that's a lot of the reason I've often been in book clubs, because you're going to have these books recommended and that's your selection that month. And half the time I never would have picked that book up out of the shelf. I never would have said, oh, that's the one I want to read. But almost every time I was so glad that I had read that. Very few times would I've been like, oh, this was a real slog to get through. I didn't think it was my thing and I was right. Very few times.
Yeah. I wish I had that experience. I was in a book club and they wanted to read lots of different genres that I was not interested in. There was one book, however, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but it was written by a woman in the early 1900s about her mother who from Arizona. It's an Arizona book. And about how they lived on a ranch not too far from where I live, actually. And her husband was abusive. And so it was written by the youngest child, the youngest daughter, about her mother and how her mother, it's this fascinating life. I wish I could remember the name of that book because they used to sell it in Benson at the bookstore there. They have a book that Benson has this bookstore where they have this whole section of just Arizona
locals. Yeah. I love it when bookstores do that.
Yeah. Oh man, that was such a fascinating book. And that's the one book that I went, oh, wow, I'm so glad I read the book. Sometimes the other ones were more like political stuff, and I'm not into that. Yeah. And I think for me, the final straw was they wanted to read a classic novel, a classic British novel. And one of the women had it in her head that she wanted to read Middlemarch. Well, I don't know if you've ever seen Middlemarch, but it's like, it's like it's almost 1,000 pages. And I had read it. Yeah. And I said, okay, you guys, I'm not sure that's the book you should start with. Yeah. A third of the book is setting up the story and the language, 1800s language is difficult. You might want to start with something like Jane Eyre or something like that, which is a little more accessible. No. They wanted to, when it came time to get together, nobody had read the book. Yeah. They gave up. They had all given up. And I was like, okay, that's it. I just
wasn't quite the right book club for you, maybe.
No, it wasn't the right book club for me. And I am not a big new and shiny reader. I don't like the new and shiny usually. Even Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, everybody's going on and on and on. I think I read it maybe 5 years after it had, when people were still talking about it. And then I said, oh, okay, maybe that might be worth reading. And it was, because my first degree is in religious studies. So it was perfect. But yeah. And then, that's another book that you might want to. I had 3 authors recently that I talked to that all the books take place in Israel.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, at least partially in Israel. And Sharon Hart Green's book, Come For Me, has 2 storylines that merge eventually. But the first part is a survivor of the Holocaust. In fact, he escaped even getting sent to, but the rest of his family was sent and died in concentration camps. And the trauma of, because he and his youngest sister his parents said, the Nazis are coming, run. Yeah. And they got separated, and he had been trying to find his sister all these years and never, finally, in the end, he found out what happened to her. But there was part of his family that was in New York City. And so that storyline starts in the 60s, I think. His story starts during the war. Right. And then they merge. Oh, interesting. So that's a really great one. And then Ellen Frankel, this one just came out, and she said to me when I interviewed her, she said, it's the Jewish Da Vinci Code. Because it's about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh,
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and it's a mystery series. And the first one is called The Deadly Scrolls, And it has a woman who is like equivalent of the FBI. She's an agent at Israeli FBI kind of thing. There's a murder of an American archaeologist who claims to have found something about the treasure. There's this scroll that they find that has supposedly there's a treasure buried someplace, and he's going to announce what he's found. And well, he's murdered the night before, you can tell. So yeah, she's investigating the murder, and it's so interesting. That's a fascinating one. And then Moshe Mikanovsky, who just happens to actually know Sharon Hart Green, they live in Toronto, not too far from each other, wrote a book called The Resurrector, and it takes place in Israel as well. And it's about a family who the youngest son has died. And I didn't know about this, but the more Orthodox Jewish families practice this thing called Shiva, where it's a 7 days of mourning. So during that time, the father and the son had been estranged from each other, and the father goes on this kind of spiritual journey, reconciling with his son who had died, or at least reconciling his feelings about his son, maybe. So that was really fascinating too. So I've been very busy.
Yeah.
And those aren't the only ones that I've read. Some of them are fantasies, and so
which sometimes you need to break it up. For me, if I've been reading something that's really kind of heavy and emotional, especially if it is, based in historical fiction, or like we're talking about events during the Holocaust or something like that, where it's really heavy and things that, you're really wrestling with, and knowing that this is a part of our history, our true history, even if it's a fictional story. Sometimes I have to break it up and do some sort of like YA, romance, fantasy romance, or something like that, something light and fluffy that's not going to hurt my brain. And then I can go back and read something a little more substantial. Yeah. And I think that's, what's comforting, what people find comforting about genres like romance or cozy mystery is there is a formula, and you kind of know what to expect. It's mind candy, and you like that flavor, and you know what you're going to get, and that's why you buy it. And some, books, some novels are just really different, and taking you in places that you never expected to go. You're not sure where you are in the plot, and how it's going to resolve. And I love those stories better. If I'm really want to take my time and really enjoy a story, I want to be taken to a place where I had no idea it was going there.
Right.
I want to be surprised. But some readers love that comfort food, of knowing what they're going to get and getting exactly that.
Right. I can't do that as a steady diet. It's good to do it in between the other things. So what are your favorite genres?
Oh gosh, I love, I don't write it really, but I love fantasy. I love romance, especially fantasy romance.
Or historical romance. I'm even loving these historical romances that are actually like male romances. I've gotten so into that in the last few years. I didn't know it was my thing until I tried it. And then I'm like, this is my thing. I love this thing. Something about it I just really love. So I've been reading a lot of those. Kat Sebastian, Mackenzie Lee are good ones. Emma Scott has written a couple of those as well. She's a fantastic romance writer. For fantasy, my favorite and ones that I keep going back to are written by Alona Andrews. And they're romancy, but they're also fantasy. And they have a number of series. And I say they, not because they're a they, them identifier. They're actually two people, Alona and Andrew, or her husband. It's a husband and wife team, and they write together under the pseudonym Alona Andrews. And they're fascinating and fun.
I've read them time and time again. So I really recommend Alona Andrews.
There's another husband-wife team, Michael husband-wife team that write romances.
Romances?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll have to check it out. Yeah.
So, yeah. So what else?
Let's see. As far as like just novels that I thought were wonderful and took me places that I didn't realize they were going. I'm a fan of Erin Morgenstern. She's written a couple of books, The Night Circus, also The Starless Sea. I thought they were fascinating novels. And I was just surprised, at how complex the story was and how complex the characters were and how surprised I was at where the story went. And I wonder if she's like me, a pantser, where she just kind of flies by the seat of her pants when she's writing. She doesn't plot everything out.
Oh, that's me.
It feels like that when I'm reading it. Like, she's discovering the story as she goes along. What else? Richard Powers, The Overstory, astounding. And again, it's a lot of storylines overlapping and coming together and talking about really trees. If I just wanted to sum it up in one sentence, it's about trees and about humanity's interaction and relationship with trees and with nature.
I want to read the woman's book that he wrote about, the woman that he wrote about in that novel. She wrote her own book about her research about trees. What is it called? I have it on my list. The Mother Tree or something like that. I'll have to put it in the show notes.
I'll have to check it out.
I'm not sure I can.
I think my other favorite would be Anthony Doerr. He wrote All the Light We Cannot See, which is fascinating. I've read it several times. Again, that ties into the Holocaust. He's just Cuckoo Land, which I have not read, but it's on my book stand here, my nightstand, and I can't wait to read it. I've heard wonderful things about that book, so I can't wait to dive into that. I think his writing style is just fascinating. David Mitchell's another one that I've really enjoyed, where the characters are so complex. Atlas. The story, Cloud Atlas, was fascinating.
Oh yeah.
I loved the Bone Clocks. Again, it was just kind of strange, and it had some kind of supernatural element to it. But the characters in his writing is they're just astounding. It's one of those books that when I was reading it, I put it down a couple times in despair as a writer and been like, I'll never write this good. Like I should just give up now.
Really?
Why do I bother? Where it really like knocked your ego down to size and be like, oh man, I'm never going to be able to write this good. And those are the kind of books that I love that just blow me away.
Yeah. I'm going to recommend this one. It's another series that I love, and it's called The Circle of Ceridwen. It starts in like 890 or something like that. And it's the Vikings have come to England, but it's historical. And I learned so much because it takes place in the Middle Ages. And I always thought, the Middle Ages, cold, wet, dank, everybody huddled in their huts. No, it's not like that at all. And it talks about the trade and the different industries, if you want to call them that. There are cottage industries that the people are engaged in, like when the women are weaving and they grow flax for the undergarments, and then the outer garments are wool. And how they prepare it, and then the trade and how far the trade went. I mean, it was long, but it's also kind of a romance thing. But it's mostly women, centered on the women in the story.
This sounds fascinating. It was called The Story of what wood? Sorry,
it's called The Circle.
Oh, The Circle.
The Circle of Ceridwen. Ceridwen. Ceridwen, which is a Welsh name, I think.
Right. Perfect. All right. Thank you. I'm going to check that one out. I've been really into kind of Viking type stories these days. And I love that idea of really understanding, what women's roles were at that point and their trade and their alliances and how they, kept their families fed. And that always kind of fascinates me, how women operate in their society. That sounds really fun.
Well, yeah. And this woman at the beginning, Carradwin, the main character in almost the whole series, but it goes through, she's just come out, Octavia Randolph has just come out with the 8th or 9th book. I stopped at 7 because I was ticked off at one of the characters. I'll have to pick it up again. But it's these two women who become friends, and one of the women, I cannot pronounce her name because it's Saxon, but it's like Elfred or something like that. Mm-hmm. And she is going to, her father has made this alliance with a Viking lord. And so she's going off to marry him to cement this
alliance or
so he's protected, his estates are protected. Mm-hmm. And she's only 17 or something. Mm-hmm. Carradwin's only 15 or 16, mm-hmm. but they become good friends. And Carradwin was raised in a monastery for, I'm not going to go into her whole story, but so she knows how to read and write. And so she teaches her friend how to read and write, because most women don't have education like that. But there's one Viking character that is through all the stories, and he's in love with Carradwin, and takes a while for them to get together. But I have to say, and I've said this before, I had never heard of the island of Gotland in the middle of the Baltic Sea. It's part of Sweden. And it was like, Gotland, I had to go look it up and find out about it. And it has, kind of that Scandinavian culture. Yeah. But again, it's all of the industries that they had, and how they trade and how far they trade, and all of that stuff was so fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's super fun. Thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that one. And the dressmaker of Carahakana or whatever. Mm-hmm. I can never say the town right. Those are ones I recommend a lot. Mm-hmm. So, oh, wow, this has been so fun. Go on forever and ever, I imagine.
We could. 2 readers talking about books.
That's right.
It could go on for a long time.
That's right. Yes.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun to connect with you.
Oh, I wanted to know, how do you pronounce memoir of a
Mzungu? Mzungu. So, and that's a very typical way of referring to a white person in Africa. It's the same through a number of languages, mostly through the Bantu languages, and also Swahili. They spell it a little differently. They spell M-Z-U-N-G-U. They kill that first U. But that's just a very typical way to just kind of call a white person. So I was a Mzungu for many years. So I think people that have been a Mzungu are going to recognize that and be like, oh yeah, I know what this is about, So, it's almost an insider joke, right?
Right.
Anyone who's been a white person in Africa will know what that means.
Yes. Because you do explain that in the novel, but I want people to know, because especially if you send me the cover of your book, which I hope you will, they're going to go, what?
Yeah. What is that?
Yeah. So, yeah, I hope it's not a derogatory term, but
no, there are plenty of derogatory terms. That's not one of them.
Oh, good. Yes.
It kind of literally means like English speaker. Honestly, because the English is like Chisungu. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I think it's derived from that. That's how it was described to me anyway. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been extremely fun.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun for me too.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a rating and/or review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. I invite you to join my Patreon community at patreon.com/storypower, all one word. Or if you like, you can subscribe to Story Power on Apple Podcasts. It's my aim to build a community where we discuss the stories we love and talk about what we learned from them. I offer extra audio content and story suggestions to my patrons on both platforms. Remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Let's spread the story love. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.